I was born in the Medina district in Mogadishu. I left the city at a very young age because of civil war. I eventually made my way to the US, to Westerville, where I spent about 15 years. So I hadn't seen Mogadishu in quite a while. So one day I decided to go back to visit Medina, my neighborhood, to see where I was born. I returned to find a neighborhood completely changed. 22 years of civil war had completely changed the neighborhood. Before the Civil War, Medina was a neighborhood of quiet residential streets, white stucco walls, wide avenues lined with palm trees. I returned to find trees that were completely gone, burned for fuel, walls that were bullet-ridden, homes that were destroyed. This was not the Medina of my childhood. But the most disturbing thing for me was the absence of light. At sunset, Mogadishu is completely transformed. It is enveloped by a suffocating darkness. One of my earliest childhood memories is sitting on top of the roof of our home, staring out into the city's night lights, talking to my brothers and my sister. Those lights were gone now. 22 years of civil war had completely destroyed the electrical grid and the infrastructure of the city. There were no street lamps. And by dusk, everyone is off the streets. No one goes out at night. And something amazing happened last year. The city, for the first time in 22 years, was lit up. Someone at the mayor's office had an idea. The city didn't have the infrastructure to light up the street lamps. The mayor's office didn't have the resources. The government didn't have the capacity to rebuild the entire grid. And so his idea was, what if we use the sun to light up the night? He connected with European investors, and soon after, 100 street lights powered by the sun, solar street-powered lights were installed throughout the neighborhoods. And it really changed the city. It transformed the neighborhoods. It changed the way people interacted with their city. Kids started playing outside at night, having soccer matches. You'd see people having driver lessons under these solar-powered lights. It was pretty amazing, and businesses and shops stayed open longer. Neighborhoods came alive. For a city that was under darkness for 22 years, this was pretty amazing. More than any time in history, today, our world is being changed by transformative innovation, new technologies, disruptive ideas. The idea of harnessing the power of the sun for something as simple as a streetlight transformed an entire city. Somalis use a new technology to address some of the biggest challenges faced by their city. And so the question for me is, how do I use innovation? How do I promote innovation in order to combat poverty, in order to fight terrorism, piracy? These are some of the biggest challenges faced by my country of birth, Somalia. And so I went to Mogadishu this August to give a TEDx talk, but also to hold a youth entrepreneurship and leadership summit. The topic was innovation. What is innovation? How do you become innovative? How do you become an innovator? One of our speakers was a man by the name of Isa. We invited him to talk about innovation and to talk to our youth about how to become innovators. And he spoke about cappuccino. By kilowatt hour, Mogadishu is one of the most expensive cities when it comes to electricity, primarily because electricity is powered by diesel fuel. And so as a result, 1 cup of cappuccino made with an espresso machine that uses that electricity in Mogadishu can be more expensive than any other cappuccino made in New York in a Starbucks. And so many other cafes in the city were struggling with the astronomical cost of electricity, of making these cups of cappuccino. A society cannot grow without cheap access to electricity. Businesses cannot thrive without access to cheap electricity. And Isa realized this. He came up with an idea. He bought several espresso machines from Italy, and he began experimenting. And what he did was he removed the electrical components of these espresso machines and replaced them with coal-powered components. And voila, you had the cheapest cup of cappuccino in all of Mogadishu. No electricity needed. And this had a transformative impact. Businesses began thriving in these cafes. They started selling more cappuccinos. And for me, when you ask me what was so important about this, why was this innovative, I talk about frugal innovation, innovation that is born out of limited resources. You don't need high-tech innovation. It's about doing something cheaper, better. And the thing is, with frugal innovation, it doesn't have to be high-tech. And it actually had a greater impact than something made in an R&D lab. And so the most powerful thing for me about Isa's innovation is that it created economic value. It created jobs from these cafes. Granted, coal-powered anything isn't exactly ideal, but he was changing lives in a certain manner. And so this brings me to my second story. Why is innovation important? Why do I care so much about innovation? About 3 weeks before my event, I arrived in Mogadishu to organize the event. We arrived on a beautiful Wednesday morning, nothing but blue skies above. We dropped off our luggage at a hotel and decided to go visit some family and friends across the city. If you live in Mogadishu, you know of K4. It is this huge roundabout in the middle of the city. And it's usually involved with traffic jams involving vans, trucks, donkey carts. And so we decided to take a corner street in order to avoid the traffic. About 15 minutes later, a group of gunmen attacked a Swedish diplomat at that very same spot. They killed her translator, they killed her guard, and she was seriously wounded. I was absolutely shaken. I was heartbroken by these senseless deaths, but most of all, I was angry at these assailants. A few days later, we found out that they were actually pirates. They would normally make their living by hijacking ships off the coast of Somalia and putting them up for ransom. But over the past 2 years, NATO forces have been patrolling the seas off the coast of Somalia. And these pirates, with no other way to earn an income, were coming into Mogadishu to target foreigners in hopes of making millions through ransom. And so the underlying issue of piracy wasn't solved. In Somalia, in Mogadishu, 68% of young people are unemployed. They're essentially doing nothing. And as a result, they're vulnerable to recruitment by these terrorist groups or piracy groups. And so I now want to talk to you about dry cleaning. For the past 22 years, if you wanted your suits dry cleaned, you couldn't do it in Mogadishu. You actually had to buy a $500 ticket and fly to Nairobi. And most government officials and business officials actually packed up all their clothes or suits whenever they're going abroad and have their clothes dry cleaned. But for most people who can't really afford it, it wasn't really an option. They either hand washed their suits or they just didn't wear suits at all. And so one of the attendees at our event was a young man by the name of Mahmoud. He had this idea. And so I spoke about high-tech innovation in the form of those solar lamps, frugal innovation, low-tech innovation in the form of the cappuccino. This was innovation or rediscovery. It wasn't necessarily creating something new, but discovering something old. He saved up some money from family, and he hired 2 people from Nairobi who knew the dry cleaning business. He brought them to Mogadishu. He told them, teach me how to start up a dry cleaning business. They helped him start up the business, and he opened up shop. And he started dry cleaning clothes. And it really changed the way people behaved. I mean, people who had never worn suits were now wearing them. People who had never considered wearing suits started wearing them. I mean, he affected the way people viewed themselves. And so I tell people that you need to create an environment where innovation can thrive. Innovation like that cappuccino, or innovation like Mohammed's. The challenge with innovation is that it starts with an idea, perhaps an amazing idea. But if that idea is not developed, if that idea is not connected with resources, innovation dies essentially at inception. At my youth leadership shop, many of the young people had these amazing ideas for starting up their own businesses. But they weren't connected to the resources. They didn't have capital. They didn't have expertise. They didn't have mentorship. As a result, their innovations and their innovative ideas never really saw the light of day. So you need to invest in local innovators. You need to invest in local innovations. You need to help these innovators come from idea to reality. And you can actually accelerate peace. And that's what people like Isa and Mohammed are. They're peacemakers, in essence. They're creating opportunities for people that would, in other cases, be part of terrorism or piracy or be tied into criminal organizations. They're creating jobs, driving economic growth. They're not just innovators, they're peacemakers. They're accelerating peace. So I want to finish off with one last story. A few months ago, the terrorist group Al-Shabaab targeted these solar-powered lamps and blew several of them up. After the attack, one of the questions I asked myself was, why? Why would they target something as simple, as pedestrian as a street lamp? On December 31st of last year, something pretty amazing happened. With the approach of midnight, huge crowds of people started coming outside. It was this spontaneous recognition of a dawning new year. It wasn't anything that had been seen in over 22 years. People were actually coming out and celebrating a New Year's. I mean, think about it. Think about a city where New Year's was never celebrated, where no one came out at night. Under darkness, they feared their city. And in light, they were a community. They were a community coming out to celebrate. This was why Al-Shabaab targeted those lights. They were threatened by it. They were threatened by the transformative impact of innovation. And this is why I repeatedly go back to Mogadishu. I'm actually going back this January, hopefully. And despite that near miss with that attack to the Swedish lady, I will go back because innovation needs to be promoted. Invest in innovators, create more innovators, and you will accelerate peace and light up an entire city. Thank you.